with me as I share with you another aspect of my personality. Sometimes I dabble in poetry, and we'll see what happens here, all right? There are two poems here. One goes for about 2 minutes, the other goes for about 1 minute, and they have to do with what's recently going on in my life, and let's see what you think. The first one is called Goodbye, Anna May. So long, dear niece, I'll miss you. You are too beautiful for one man alone, for one lucky fool to be with. That was one of my favorite greetings when she answered my phone call. Another was, I love you for sentimental reasons. I hope you do believe me. And yet another among a collection of musical professions of love I serenaded Anna May with when I occasionally called her was, if I loved you time and again, I would stop to say, all I want you to know, how I love you. And this is how I'd consistently start our telephone visits, because I knew dependently that my silly singing would elicit a cheery, smiling response, which made me feel kind of warm and fuzzy inside. I am Uncle Don, Anna May's father's youngest and last surviving brother, who from the time when we were prepubescents in Depression-era New Orleans always had a very special love for Carol and Louise's oldest daughter. I remember her childhood mimicking the mothering behaviors of Lou when Anna May decided that her many sisters needed guidance when Lou was out of eyesight. I don't recall much else about Anna May through the years, until the recent years when we reconnected and I found real joy in professing my love for her and eliciting her sweet response. And I didn't remember anything more than that, because those teleconnections and the feelings they engendered will still linger when Anna May crosses my mind from now on. And that is what she gave to me, and that is what I'll miss. So long, dear niece. I'll miss you. The Lorelei lure of Lake Pontchartrain. Having no conscious motivation except some vague need to sit on the near bottom step of the lake seawall and gaze meaninglessly out over the restless yet gentle waves, I'm guessing at my seeming unconscious need to return here periodically. I recall my near-drowning experience in the 1930s under those restless, gentle waves, only to realize that perhaps the real reason for my returning is simply to provoke an awareness that my life is not endless. And this moment right now is all I really have.
Thank you, Don. I don't even dare try poetry, so thank you. This morning's program is on the northwest face of coal, oil, and gas. Joyce Lackey, would you please introduce our speaker?
Duane Ray, physicist and former member of HGP, has spoken to this group on topics from quantum mechanics and relativity to the nuclear power issue. With degrees from Swarthmore College and the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Ray is retired from a career with AT&T at Bell Laboratories and continues to teach at local community colleges. Here is retirement a la Duane Ray. He has taught courses for Elder Hostel and Clark College. He built his and his wife's concrete house, and he pursued his love of photography. He is now heavily involved with the Portland Community College Senior Studies Institute, chairing it in 2012-13 and helping to increase its membership. In January of this year, Duane taught a course at Clark entitled The New U.S. Face of Coal, Oil, and Gas, the subject of today's talk. Just a few weeks ago, he taught a group of 9 to 13-year-olds an astronomy day as part of a science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM program at Clark College. This is called high-energy retirement. As a side effect of working on the coal, oil, and gas issue, Duane has moved in a new direction artistically. He now photographs train graffiti. No, it's not up there. Okay, he'll put it up. Okay. But it wouldn't have happened except for our problem with fuel transportation in the Columbia Gorge. So we'll turn to that with Dr. Duane Ray.
I just appreciate the artistic quality of the draftsmen that put this stuff up. I don't know what's behind it. I need to research that a little bit sometimes. I think that would be another whole avenue to go down that would be an awful lot of fun. This morning I'm going to talk to you about something that's dear to my heart and an awful lot of other people in the area. And I'm going to give you kind of a hodgepodge because I'm giving you kind of the overview of a 5-week course. But I think there's so much stuff there. I'll give you a little bit of history. I'll tell you some of the things that are relevant to what's happening in terms of the law and things of that sort, and why it's such an uphill climb to try to get things to really happen, but also a background about why it's really so very important. This is the new U.S. face of coal, oil, and gas. And of course, this is one of the main reasons we're all in this together, and it's really a significantly important thing. In the background of all this use of carbon, coal, oil, and gas, is the fact that we have global warming as a real problem. I don't believe in naysayers. I think it's really happening. I think it's probably happening more than we're aware of. And recently, one of the original people that brought it to our attention, I forget his name right now, but he's saying that we have to be really concerned because there's a potential for there being a feedback that gets started, and if we move over to the point where we get that feedback started, everything could really go bad in just 20 or 30 years. I mean, we're talking 10 feet of water and the rise in the ocean, that kind of thing, really, really serious. And of course, we know that we've met the enemy and he is us. The reason that's driving all of this in the bad direction is because of you and me and all of the things that we're doing. And especially the fact that we have all these people that want to have the same lifestyle that you and I have. And I don't blame them for that a bit. Population control is one of the other things in the background of all of this that we really need to be concerned about and try to encourage and so on. And I think as humanists you're all on board with that and would like to see it happen. There are an awful lot of people out there that don't go in that direction. Let's talk a little bit first about coal stuff, because that's the original and still a very, very big thing in this country that's causing these things. The percentage, United States has probably the biggest amount of coal resources that we're aware of in the world. Russia is next, and they don't mine an awful lot of theirs compared to what other people do. China has an awful lot, and of course China is the one that's really coming on board with trying to use it to feed their billion people and so on, and they want to have a good lifestyle also. So you'll see United States, in terms of percentage of coal mining throughout the world, United States is about 14%, Russia is only 4%, and China is really high at 50%. And their amount of use of coal has been dramatic. So China uses about half the coal in the world that's produced. United States is pretty high up there, then India, Russia, Germany, and so on. This is a typical coal power plant. You have cooling towers here you need to get the temperature between high temperature and low temperature to generate the electricity. So there's a lot of, typically beside a river, or you have cooling towers of this sort, big piles of coal, and you run that and burn it, blow off an awful lot of fumes and so on to the atmosphere, and that's not perhaps new to anybody. Just to show the coal location and quality, energy per ton, that is the subbituminous, the blue stuff is not so good, yellow is a little bit better, the red is a little bit better, and the green is the best, it's anthracite. However, some of this is contaminated with sulfur, which is bad news, and that's a problem. So it's not as straightforward as it could possibly be. The Powder River Basin out here is 41% of the United States coal, and there's really a lot of big coal mining going on there at the present time. And of course, we still hear an awful lot of the back east, West Virginia, coal mines, and we'll talk about that a little bit also. The oil and gas is kind of distributed in similar places. The things that tend to make coal also tend to make oil and gas, and we take benefit of that. Let's talk a little bit about the coal. This is the continental divide that I'm putting down here, and that, of course, will become important a little bit later when we talk about the importance of our area in terms of shipping coal overseas and doing different things with it, the oil and the gas also. These are the pockets for the coal. Western coal is high quality, which means for the most part low sulfur. It's not necessarily dense in energy, but the fact it's low sulfur just means you burn a lot more of it and you're not creating as much problems as those with high sulfur. Acid rain, after 1970, power plants were required to use coal with low sulfur content, and very often what that meant was they would take all this coal that had the high sulfur in it, and then they dilute it down with other coal that didn't have such high until they got below the requirement of the federal government. So at least that was a help, and we didn't have acid rain as being much of a problem as it would have been otherwise. Mountaintop removal, big equipment, few jobs. So the people that talk about jobs all the time, well, yes, initially, but after that, not so much. We'll see more of that later also. And it absolutely devastates the environment. Let me go back and show you a little bit where the history is in the eastern part. But we're first mentioning that China and India is the driving force for an awful lot of the mining of coal, particularly in this part of the country, of course. And here are the places where the coal gets across the mountain. So there are some down here, but of course the Marianas Pass and the Mullen Pass are the two that bring it in through the northwest to get it to the ports that take it over to India and to China particularly. These are both BNSF railroad tracks that go through those areas. And in this area, BNSF is on the Washington side, and Union Pacific is on the Oregon side. And you'll see pretty much the BNSF is going one way, always downhill toward the ocean on the Washington side. Very rarely do you ever see a train going from west to east on the north side of the river. And the South Union Pacific tends to have much more two-way traffic, and they don't run nearly the oil and coal that BNSF does. Okay, we'll go back to the east. This is West Virginia, just to show you some pictures of mountaintop removal. The equipment is huge. The areas are amazing. This is somebody's house down here. I'm sure they are certainly impacted by the fact that they're taking an awful lot of coal in this area right beside them. Memorial service for 29 miners killed in the Massey Upper Big Branch mine disaster. Massey employs approximately 5,800 people. I don't know what, well, it's not that important. This is Mr. Massey, well, former Massey CEO, Don Blankenship. The federal government charges him, even though he managed a company with an annual revenue of $2 billion. That is, they charge him personally because they feel that anybody that has to sign off on a $1.50 per hour pay raise for a few truck drivers at this coal mine area, he's so much into the total control and details that he's responsible for a lot of things that go on there. It's not just he can't escape the well, it's a corporation, and I'm just a person that helps to run some of that stuff. So it does reveal something about his hands-on policy that he had to talk about. He had to okay this $1.50 an hour raise. $70 million in fines, but mines don't necessarily shut down whenever they have these fines. That is, they don't come in and the government doesn't require that you shut down until you pay your fines. Okay, and there's one case in particular. Congressman Miller, a bill pending in both the House and Senate, would automatically shut down mines 6 months after fines become delinquent. But the bill has no traction. Everybody's bought off, and so there's no way that they're going to do it. Among the mining executives that NPR investigated, one coal mine owner in West Virginia stands out. His mines own nearly $2 million in overdue fines, while he himself is a prominent billionaire. Jim Justice, West Virginia's richest man with a net worth of $1.6 billion. He owns 70 active mines employing 1,200 miners in 5 states. In addition to running his business, he has invested or given away more than $200 million in the last 5 years. That is, he's not broke. He'll give away a couple of $100 million for his self-aggrandizement, but he won't pay $2 million in fines that he legitimately owes from his coal mining things. Huge equipment, so the number of workers that's needed is really kind of minimal. This is the kind of size truck. You think you see big dump trucks going through the streets? Forget about it. These are absolutely huge, and they're used everywhere. This is a machine that mines coal. It's got a rotary digger on the other end here, puts it up, loads it out, and drops it out this way. That's then scooped up and put into those big trucks that I showed you. This is to give you an indication of the size. That here's Statue of Liberty twice. Okay, so it is an absolutely huge mine. Coal-fired power plants are still the way an awful lot of people in the United States get their electricity, and they're distributed out here. The size indicates the amount of coal that they're using, the amount of power that they're producing. Boardman Coal Plant is closing in 2020. It's morphing over into a gas-fired plant. Using methane gas instead of coal is certainly a plus in terms of you get more calories per pound of CO2 that you release, so it's better, but it's not the best. It's not solar, it's not wind energy, and so on. So it's a step in the right direction. And they dispose of all the coal ash that they have in a landfill, and it's one of the safer ways to go with it. Their landfill doesn't seem to be a problem. At this point, I haven't heard any discussion about that as being a real difficult problem. However, there are an awful lot of disposal sites that are in fact a problem. In North Carolina, this coal ash spill, February 2014, this is right beside the river. Very often these are in places where people aren't using that land, so it's easy to just out of sight, out of mind, dump the stuff, keep it wet down so it doesn't blow around and so on. You don't have to cover it particularly. But then if you have a disaster and something blows out and it spills into the river and contaminates things downstream, it has an awful lot of toxins in it, acids and other nasty things you really don't want to know about. Duke Energy spill was 50 to 82,000 of coal ash, 27 million gallons of contaminated water. It's just one of 30 sites in North Carolina. These are some of the worst ones, coal waste dumps. Here's another one. This happened in the Emory River in Harriman, Tennessee, December 2008. This broke out and contaminated the river, and people downstream had to stop taking their drinking water out of it for months. It destroyed the small town that had, I think, about 130, and there's only one, like Truman up at, whenever they knew St. Helens was going to blow out, this one guy insisted he's just going to stay there. That's where he grew up. That's where his life is. So there's one guy still living there, but for the most part, everything is just wiped out and devastated. So those are the potential things that can happen. These are coal waste dumps throughout the United States. Fortunately, we don't have too many of those up here. We've gone in other directions. We have an awful lot of water power, for one thing, which is a real big plus for us. Okay, let's go back and talk a little bit more about some of the gas and oil aspects of it. Now, we hit a little bit on the coal. First of all, fracking is not new. Fracking started in 1948 down in Texas. They got a patent on it, and it wasn't really very successful. You know, they drill a hole down, they put high-pressure water down to crack the things, the rock, so that they get more oil out, and it increased things a little bit for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, but it wasn't really very dramatic. So, well, after the war, people had all these nuclear bombs that they wanted to do things with, so they decided, damn, I have a great idea. Let's start fracking with nuclear weapons. So, you can't make this stuff up. And so they fracked with a 29 kiloton 1967 nuclear bomb. That didn't work. So they figured, well, if one doesn't do it, two is at least twice as good. So they did one above the other in New Mexico. Didn't work there, so we got to try it someplace else. So they went to Colorado, and they did two more in Colorado. So a total of 5 nuclear bombs were set off underground to try to frack and get this stuff out. Still didn't work. That was not the way to go. Then we became aware of this shale up in this area of Pennsylvania and New York that had an awful lot of gas and oil particularly. So they decided, yeah, we'll go try there. And they fracked their first well in 2007, and that was where they really started to know how to do it and do it right. They were able to drill down. They had, at this time, developed the horizontal drilling also, so they could drill down 1,000 feet and then drill horizontally for a mile or two if they wanted to. And they've developed the fluids for the fracking so that now it was really successful. So you have this water, and a few 100,000 gallons of water you're working with, and you use that in high pressure. But then once you get these cracks open, you want to have this stuff stay open. So you have to contaminate that water with some ceramic that's kind of finely ground up so it gets in all the little nooks and crannies and props it open. But then you want the water to really be able to go way back in, so you add some chemicals that make this stuff very wetting. And then, of course, there's stuff that you're putting down to wedge it open, like sand and silica and so on. That tends to sink, so you put stuff in to make it a little bit gelatinous, okay? So that makes it carry down through real well, and it racks. And then, of course, all this stuff, you don't want it to start growing algae and other kinds of fungus and things that might clog up those things, so you put chemicals in to kill all that stuff. So this is not the kind of stuff you want to have in your local water system. Well, of course, anybody knows you're not going to do that. However, there's a Halliburton loophole in 2005. The Energy Policy Act, in its 1,700 sections, has a provision that exempts natural gas industry from Safe Drinking Water Act, which governs what can be injected into the ground. So forget all that stuff, okay? It doesn't make any difference. We got to get that gas out of the ground and make all kind of money with it. Halliburton, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Okay, well, anyhow, let's see, let's go back here. Then New York State was concerned about the fact that they were starting to frack over in the area where they get their watershed, the water down for New York City. So they passed a law that said no fracking in this area, okay? So that stopped any fracking up in here for anything on the New York watershed. Now these are other areas, and the Bakken oil field was opened up, and they did some fracking out there. They started in 2008, and that's really been going gangbusters ever since. Really fast, really exploded, and so the price of oil was affected by all the oil that they were getting there. By the way, I forgot to mention that typically at the wellhead, oil coming out of a fracked well, after you've paid all the expenses for the drilling and so on, they can put that on the market for $18 a barrel. Everybody's happy for that. Saudi Arabia does it for $6 a barrel. It costs them that much to bring it out. So they're making all kinds of money if they do that. So it's not like it this $100 barrel, $100 a barrel cost dropped precipitously. I'm not sure where it is now. It's probably in the $50 to $60, maybe $70 range. But part of that is kind of artificial. There's an awful lot of people that are happy to sell it above $18. They would like to also recoup their investments for the drilling in the first place. Okay, again we have the Continental Divide. And it turns out, I thought I had another one. Okay, Los Angeles water supply being poisoned. California investigated more than 2,000 injection wells for possible risks to public safety, clean water, and natural resources. But Governor Brown hasn't released the findings yet. Now that's just a couple of days ago. So they're having problems with that big time. And of course they're really sucking water out of their aquifers. So if those are contaminated, then that's really becoming a real big problem. These are the areas over in Pennsylvania and up into New York State. There's an awful lot of natural gas and an awful lot of oil in that area, mostly natural gas. So they really want to take advantage of that. This again shows you where the New York water supply comes from. And a lot of people also don't realize that if a company from Canada or Mexico wants to frack in New York, they have the right to sue New York State and would have to compensate if they would not allow them to frack. So you can't do it from the United States, but because of these international trade agreements, of which there are some now on the table, those override local laws, so that somebody from Canada could come down and say, we want to frack, and they would have to buy them off if they didn't want them to actually do it. And that's actually happening. Lone Pine Resources, United States Corporation, suing Canada for $250 million after the Quebec province banned fracking. A Swedish company is suing Germany for $407 billion because it's phasing out nuclear energy. Okay, and they want to go in and put in nuclear power plants. And Germany says, no, we're not going to have any more nuclear. We're going to get rid of what we have. Well, because of these international trade agreements, that's a problem. So those are the kind of backdoor pressures that are on all of these kinds of things. No wonder they don't want to make them public and up for discussion, okay? It's just amazing what's happened. And of course, these disputes are decided by an arbitration panel of business people. So like I said, we're really bouncing around an awful lot here, but I think it's a lot of information you'll be able to pick up on and take advantage of. Okay, the Bakken Shale Formation is one of the biggies now up in North Dakota here, and it goes into Canada also. And when I talk about they drill down, they drill maybe horizontally for a mile or two, this shows how that area is covered with all of these horizontal drilling things. You got to make sure you're parallel with your neighbor so that you don't overlap. But that's all very well coordinated. And the people that own this land, some of it's good news, some of it's bad news. And they can make a lot of money. We could discuss that an awful lot more, but I don't want to go into an awful lot of it here. But there were a lot of instant millionaires made. There were an awful lot of other people that just had their land devastated. Not everybody, particularly in this area in the West, they didn't all have the mineral rights underneath their land. So even though they had the property on top, they got the devastation that's associated with doing all this stuff, but they may not have gotten any of the money associated with it. So it can be very tough. When you're drilling for gas, this is the kind of thing you do. You have a drilling rig. Then you have trailers of chemicals. All those things you're going to run down in and have the pressure on and make sure everything doesn't grow and that it's going to work properly. And then a pond for the wastewater. Whenever you pump it back up, it's got to go someplace because you don't want that. No customer wants to pay for that. They just want the oil or the gas. And so this is a typical kind of huge drilling rig area and so on. And of course, they're 24/7. And if they happen to be beside your property, well, that's the way it goes. You can read your newspaper all night long without paying an electric bill. This is some of the indication of how huge some of these areas are. This is flaring off gas from the Bakken region. So whenever they drill the oil, sometimes it's not worth it to capture the gas and pipe it to someplace else because it's not that much. It's just too much overhead to do that. So instead of just flaring it off, because methane is really a bad greenhouse gas, they'll burn it to CO2, which is a greenhouse gas, but it's not nearly as bad as methane is. So that's the good news. Also, you'll take a look at this, and I don't know whether that's Athabasca up there or not. It could be, because even though it's very expensive to mine things in Athabasca, and I'll show you that in a minute, they still are doing some of that. Here, as a matter of fact, is an Athabasca mining and refining for pet coke. This is from a Greenpeace DVD. They flew over and took pictures of this stuff. I'm sure they didn't have access on the ground, but they flew over and they took a marvelous, put together a marvelous DVD. This is the bitumen that they're mining. They have bulldozers that take this and push this hard stuff down. It goes into a pile down here. Then this loads it up onto these huge trucks. I showed you those trucks before. So here are the empty trucks going back down. They get loaded up, and here are the full trucks coming off. Just a constant flow of these things. I mean, huge amounts of stuff are being brought out for that. Utah also has tar sands, so we can have some local activity in that direction. And of course, you'll see, and I'm going to show you later, there's an awful lot of demonstration about all this stuff that's going on locally too. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about why we get focused in the Northwest on some of these things. We know North Dakota is the site of an awful lot of this oil and gas. And here are the railroad lines. Union Pacific goes down this Oregon side of the Columbia River. BNSF goes on the Washington side of the river. And Canadian National also feeds out to the West Coast terminals and so on whenever they're going up in this direction. And they trade around among, they rent space on the lines from one another a little bit, but for the most part they stay with their own if they can. Okay, this is where the coal is, remember, and we're going to try to sell some of that coal to China and India. This is also where some of the gas is, And here's the Athabasca oil fields I talked to you about. The Athabasca River goes up here. The gas and oil is in this direction. And remember, we talked about the passes through the Continental Divide up in our area. Both of those are BNSF tracks. And then we go through Stevens Pass and the Snoqualmie Pass up in Washington State. And what happens is the BNS have heavily loaded trains, whether it's oil or gas, go down the river here. Then they get emptied out, and then the empty ones go back through the hilly parts to get back to repeat the process all over again. So the heavily loaded trains go down the gorge, and the unloaded light stuff goes over the Continental Divide to go back up over a ridge, and that's a definite positive for them. And of course, the reason they like the Columbia River is that out at Tri-Cities, it's about 345 feet of elevation where the Snake River comes in. And by the time you get down to some of the terminals close to the ocean, you're at about 7 feet. Nice, uniform, rolling downhill whenever these have these heavily loaded trains. So it's logical. That's certainly the smart thing to do. And as I said, on the BNSF side, on the Washington side, you rarely see, occasionally, but you rarely see a train going in the other direction from west to east. Here are some of the Columbia River terminals. Vancouver's one that I'll talk a little bit more about later. That's very much up in the air about an awful lot of people demonstrating against having an oil terminal there. But there are a couple of companies, Tesoro and New Star, very much would like to have a terminal here. It would save them all this extra, and they could load it right on the ships here and get it to terminals on the West Coast. And there are a few other things here. This just points out the fact that it's a one-way trip to do this round-trip circuit here, and this increases the rail capacity by about 300%. So you don't have any downtime while you're sitting on a parallel track waiting for these things. Yeah, these are almost all single track on both sides. Union Pacific has a few more places where they have double track, but that is short enough. They're only a mile or two long. So a train has to pull over and stop and wait until the other train goes past, and then they come back out. They don't have parallel tracks that both directions all the time. So somebody has to stop and wait for somebody else to go past. Okay, just to give you an indication, and this always blew me away, the crude by rail facilities in December of 2010, there was a few things over here as they were starting to get started and a couple of little things here. In 2013, it exploded like this. So do you think there's going to be some coal trains and oil trains coming down the gorge? They would sure like to make it heavier all the time. Let's jump a little bit someplace else. Your typical car might have 200 horsepower. A truck might have 550 horsepower. And an engine has 4,400 horsepower. They're oil driven. They generate electricity, and it's really electric motors that drive the wheels. Very often you'll have 3, 4, 5 of these engines on one of these trains pulling and pushing. And we'll get to it a little bit later, but very often the crew for one of those things is 2, and they're pushing toward 1 person to run those things. Oh, and I'm sure they're going to start talking about 0 in the not too distant future if they can. After all, they have cars running around that way now as tests. And I understand there are trucks in Nevada that they're doing a lot of serious testing about that. Think how that's going to impact the job availability for an awful lot of people. How many people are out there on the road driving trucks? So moving freight by rails is 4 times more fuel efficient than moving freight on a highway. Trains move a ton of freight, 450 miles, on a single gallon of fuel. It's amazing how good they've become. And of course, using containers for most of the stuff that people are shipping from one part of the country to another, all that stuff from China comes in a container on a big, big boat. And they just take that container and put it onto a train or a truck, and they ship it until it gets to the end. Don't have to worry about stealing, don't have to worry about any of that stuff, don't have to worry about handling it much at all. And the fact that they use it in such huge quantities makes it extremely inexpensive to transport that way. They're trying to move in that direction with oil also. Okay, trains in the Columbia River Gorge. You can see a little train down here, and I'll blow it up, and this happens to be a mixed train of various things. But of course, it's right beside the river because the mountains, most places come right down, and they even have to drill some tunnels beside the river in order to be able to have the trains make it all the way. These are recent photos by Margie and Jim Adams. Are they here someplace? I thought they were going to be here. Okay. They sent me these pictures that they took a trip up the river on the riverboat recently. And here's an oil train, just goes off into the distance. And here's a coal train. And oil train of 120 cars, about 28,000 gallons each. And a coal train of about 120 cars also. I mean, they're huge numbers of cars in these things. I can't imagine an oil spill of that into our river that we spent how many hundreds of millions, literally, the last I heard it was just for the fish and so on was $700 million to restore all of that. And one oil spill serious oil spill could dramatically impact all of that stuff. Not all derailments are catastrophic. That is, it's not a big explosion that burns down all kinds of stuff. But you don't have to have that to contaminate a river. All you need is to have a few of these things dump in and split open, and you've got thousands of gallons drifting downstream for the rest of the river's distance to the ocean. And a lot of these things happen. You don't hear about them because they aren't worthy of headlines. But there's something like, I forget what the numbers are now, but I think it's something like 1 derailment per 100 miles per year. So it's pretty significant, but they aren't a disaster in the sense that an oil explosion or a leakage is. It's still not the kind of thing you want to have. This is the new tank car, the DOT 117, an upgrade from the 111. And basically they put a stronger thing at the end here so that you don't get punctures. But you know, if it falls over on the side, it's not the end you're worried about. It's getting a puncture from the side. And it turns out that the thickness is a little bit more than the thickness was before. And not very much though. And I didn't put in the, nothing can go wrong. And sometimes it's planned. I didn't put in here, I took out I thought it was too bad to show you. But the idea is the pipeline across Alaska to bring the oil down is pretty much the same thickness. And I had a picture of this bullet hole spewing oil out. All you have to do is have a bullet hole here. And the other one I had was I have my backpack laying on a track, beside a track in Stevenson. And then I thought about the Boston Marathoner with their backpacks. All this kind of stuff is very easy. It's all accessible. There's no way you're going to stop that 350 or 400 miles along the Columbia River and protect it. You just can't do it. So the idea that something can go wrong is really true. On the positive side, however, there are certainly things going in the other direction also. And one of them is that we're really cutting back on the emissions put out by all these things. In 1979, there was no requirement on the nitrous oxide. And there are all these different kinds of CO, hydrocarbons, various sorts of nitrous oxides, these kinds of things. And they have dropped significantly from what they used to be. A factor of 10, okay? Even much, much more. I mean, nitrous oxide, this is one of the really baddies. And particulate matter also has been dropped dramatically. So we are making strides in those directions. Yes?
Heavy duty compression is what kind of thing? Are you talking about regular cars?
These are the diesel engines on trains. This is the restrictions. Yeah, this is not your personal engines or anything like that. This is just for I don't know. It probably has a broader application than the trains, but for me, this is I was interested in it for the trains. So it's these two things that has really upgraded an awful lot. Positive train control is another thing. In September 2008, a Connex engineer operating a Metrolink train failed to stop at a red signal, causing a collision with a Union Pacific freight train. In this tragic incident, 25 lives were lost and another 135 people were injured. Now, this is not to say anything about the Amtrak. I still haven't heard, I don't think it'll be out for a while, about what happened with the Amtrak with the single engineer where they killed several people back east, remember, on the main thing. This is in addition to that, but they decided that because of that, Rail Safety Improvement Act of 2008 mandated the installation of positive train control by the end of 2015, the end of this year. We're not even close, according to the report, so it's going to have to get bumped out a little bit. What is positive train control, you ask? Well, it's basically keeping track of all the signals on all the tracks and the location and control of all the trains on all of those tracks. So it's an ideal kind of situation. So you would know where every train is all the time. You would know whether trains that are heading toward each other are on parallel tracks or on the same track to smash each other. You'd know whether the guy fell asleep at the wheel and fell over or isn't responding to any signals, so you'd be able to automatically pull that train to a stop until something got taken care of. You'd know everything about everything that's going on, not even close. And the industry isn't pursuing too much with speed in this direction because it's very expensive. And with the oversight that we're having, that's not going very strongly either. And I subscribe to Railroad Magazine, Trains, and so on, so I sort of hear comments from both sides, and it's not very encouraging. But long term, it will have its impact. Another thing, one-man train crews. I mean, we kind of cringe with that, but that's been going on for a lot of time now, and 70 U.S. short lines that use or have used one-person crews, 40% of Indiana Railroad trains with one-person crews, and 5.7% of Indiana Rail human factor incidents involved one-man crews. So if 40% of them are one-man crews and only 5.7% of the accidents were caused with one-man crews aren't all that bad. Okay, so that's not the issue. There's all kinds of other things that are the issue. Let me talk about a couple of other things here, and then we'll open it for discussion very shortly. One of the other biggies is an LNG pipeline that's being proposed to go to Coos Bay. It would have to come over here and tie in at this point where there's a north-south gas line, so it would have to be put along this area. And of course, a lot of people complain about that. But in terms of how you would like to go, I think having a gas pipeline rather than a railroad line is definitely a preferable way to go. They're all bad. They're all going to give us global warming when it's burned and so on. They all have potential. They all have inconvenience of the fact that now this guy may be able to put a wheat across that field, but he can't put a vineyard because they have to have access in case something goes wrong with the line. So it's inconvenient to the people whose land it goes across. But by the way, I'd mention, I'm being too even-handed here, whenever they have all that power generated by the wind turbines on the east end of the gorge, they have to have power lines to bring it back. And a lot of people don't like having those power lines going across their land either. So it's good news, bad news. This is one of the pipelines that's being put together. This is very similar to the XL pipeline that would be there. And these are very carefully controlled welds. They put this stuff together and they weld this stuff tightly together. And you'll see this is a pipeline that's being put in. You see those things where they're welding each section of the line as they put it in. And it's very important because I don't know about this gas line, but for the XL pipeline, for the oil pipeline, they run them at about 1,000 psi, really high pressure stuff. The oil is moving through those things at about 150 miles an hour. I mean, no wonder it's so efficient to use those pipelines. That beats a train hands down. But you really have to have the volume to fill those things up and pump it out. But that's really what happens. This is a gas pipeline that exploded in Bonneville Hot Springs Resort, February 1999. I remember that because it happened shortly after we came out here, and I was amazed that they had that kind of thing. Fortunately, it was a very rainy period of time. There was not a forest fire. It was isolated enough that it wasn't really damaging to much of anything, and it was caused by a landslide. Some land moved down and just pushed the pipe and broke it, and it caught on fire. The fire then went out, and as far as I know, nothing really was damaged. No people were hurt or anything of that sort. Just very inconvenient. But on the other hand, that same kind of thing can happen closer to where people live. If it happened in the dry season, something of that sort, it could start forest fires and be a real problem and so on. Okay, local activism is one of the biggies, and you may have, I heard on the news on the way, I knew they were going to do a demonstration yesterday, and I was looking for a newspaper picture to put up here today, and I didn't see any, but I did hear on the way in on the radio that in fact there were more than 100 boats that were out there to protest the fixing up of this icebreaker from Shell Oil, I think it's Shell Oil, that's going to be up in the Arctic. Now, that's another one of these things, nothing can go wrong, can go wrong, can go wrong. If nothing can go wrong, why did this icebreaker run aground and have to have it self-repaired? There's something that just doesn't kind of work with that. This is one of the earlier ones where this is up in Seattle area, I think, Tacoma or someplace, where they had all these, this is the kind of thing they had yesterday here in Portland, protesting this boat. They said they had more than 100 boats, and that's probably similar to this. And of course, they're all brightly colored and stuff. It's a real happening. Everybody's out there and having a good time. This is other community protests. This stuff all happens to be because of the terminal, the Tesoro terminal over Vancouver. This is a hearing, and I thought one of the most effective, they had more than 500 people at this. My wife and I are in here someplace. And I thought this is one of the more effective things you do at one of these hearings, because not everybody has a chance to testify. You only have 2 or 3 minutes, so only a certain number of people can testify in a few hours. So the first 1 or 2 that gets up there, they say, how many people are against this? And everybody puts their hand up, so it really gives an impression to the people that are up on the stage listening to all this stuff that it's not just the people testifying, everybody in the room is against this, except for maybe a few. This is one where they were testifying, or they were having a happening. Small business says no oil terminal in Vancouver. So they had this, and it was covered by Channel 8 and another channel. I did see it on Channel 8 for just a minute or two in the evening news. It did get there. Here's my wife holding a sign that she was given. And this gentleman here, Don Stenke, is extremely active. He and his wife are probably the real spark plugs of a lot of the demonstrations and organizing and so on over in the Vancouver area. They're tied into, Sierra Club and River Keepers and all that kind of stuff. They have a group. He's got a tremendous email arrangement set up, and I keep getting things just all the time. I don't go to too many things because it's just so doggone far to go over there. But I have gone to a few of the hearings and stuff, and it's kind of interesting to go hear that stuff. There's all kinds of things going on all the time, local communities and so on. This was put on, I think, by the River Keepers downtown Portland last year. Here's the 350, has a table out there with information. Sierra Club and others, Friends of the Gorge, all had tables there and handing out information and so on. This is one that was down in Oregon. Where is our? In Salem. As I'm getting older, what can I say? And one of the things that bothered us about this was it seemed like it was stacked, although it really wasn't. I don't think it was done intentionally. Hard to say. The thing is, they started meetings down there at 9 o'clock in the morning. And that included a lot of the people that were with unions and things of that sort, okay? And they were allowed to sign up to testify from 9 o'clock on. Well, I drove down with some people from Sierra Club, and we didn't get there till 12:30. So we signed up, and by the time we ended up testifying, it was 7 o'clock in the evening, because all these other guys that signed up at 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock were there first, and it's first come, first served. And at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the guys that was seeing what was going on, all these other people testifying, he stood up and started yelling and said, "This is rigged, this blah, blah." And he ended up being asked to leave, and he did. But he made a point, I thought. And I ended up testifying at 7 o'clock that evening. That's how long it stretched out. This was kind of fun. These are the, what are the Raging Grannies or something like that. I mean, So they went up and they sang there. 4 of them out there singing. It was really kind of fun. I mean, these things are kind of a happening. I mean, you're there with like-minded people, and you have lots to talk about, and it's just kind of interesting. It's kind of a fun thing to do. This is just another. This is back in New York. So it's across the country. I mean, you know, you see these things in the paper and the magazines. So they didn't want to have fracking and so on. They get a lot of people out there. They get some publicity. So that's all good. Let me mention just one other thing before I stop here. Methane is becoming a really big deal. And it's certainly the gas of choice, the carbon energy of choice compared to coal or oil. Oil we're not going to get rid of because we have all those cars and trucks that we need to supply with oil. Methane could be used to generate electricity, and as a matter of fact, one of the big things that decreased the amount of CO2 the United States put in the air over the last few years is the transfer of coal-fired plants over to methane-fired plants, and that's kind of all good news. However, as the Earth warms up, we're going to find that a lot of methane from the thawing tundra, from all that decaying material, is going to start coming into the air. And methane is, pick a number, anywhere from 20 to 25 to 30 to even more times as effective as CO2. The thing is that CO2 stays around for a couple of hundred years in the atmosphere, but methane is 23 or 24 times more effective as a greenhouse gas than CO2 is. But methane doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long because it's more chemically active. So there's a trade-off there. But anyhow, methane is definitely worse than CO2. What the factor is hard to say, but it's the order of 20 or 30 times as bad. So we have the thawing tundra that's going to start throwing an awful lot more methane. They're just demonstrating that by lighting it up. There's really a lot of methane coming out of there. And then also methane hydrates are stable at high pressure and low temperature, like deep in the cold ocean. And we have in fact found lots of methane like that in the deep ocean, which is another opportunity to mine this stuff. But on the other hand, if the ocean just kind of warms up and this stuff just starts to bubble up, this is methane hydrate brought up from the seafloor of the Oregon coast. White material is the hydrate, and then this is dirt, and of course these are the gloves that the person is handling it in. And it's slowly evaporating it because it's not under the high pressure anymore. But if you light it up, it's going to, be flame like the one before. Those are distributed throughout the coasts around the world. And one of the big places that we have a huge amount of the hydrate is off the Florida coast down here. And that's down maybe a couple thousand feet. It's got to be cold and high pressure to be stable that way. But it's a huge amount of stuff. And if the oceans start to warm up, we might start to see some of this have some impact also. There's lots of other stuff that one can talk about and so on. But let me stop it there and open it up. If you have any comments or questions, we can get a discussion going. There's just so much stuff going on. A couple of the big issues right now is whether we will have a natural gas terminal here in the Portland port. Apparently the mayor of Portland is down on that, so that's probably not going to happen. The Tesoro over in Vancouver is still very much on the table, and there's an election going on that I think is next first week or two in August to have a member on the board of the Vancouver port. And of course they're trying to get their, that is the people that are against the port are trying to get their person on the board so that he will tend to open up and give them information about what's actually going on, because it's all been secret deals at this point. And there's another person that's running, and he's gotten $150 contribution from New Star and $1,500 contributions from some person. So there's a lot of activity just to keep things going all the time. It ain't clear what's really going to happen. If it were a dead issue, then the Port Authority there would have said, no, we're not going to do it. But it's jobs, jobs, jobs. And although the local marine people don't want the Tesoro port, they say, look, if we have an accident here and it contaminates the river, it's going to screw up our jobs all the way down the river, because the ports are just going to be closed and we won't have our jobs. So the union for the marine guys is against it. But on the other hand, all the people that have those jobs for building things, those unions are starting to testify and being very positive about things. So it ain't clear what's going to happen. The person that's really going to make the final call this time around will be the governor of Washington, and he hasn't given any indication about which way he's going on that. So it's still very much an up-in-the-air issue, but there are things like that going on all the time, and that's why these active groups are there, and they're trying to do things. And one of the reasons why I'm here, for instance, trying to talk you into believing our side of the story. But I think I'm probably preaching to the choir for the most part.
Is there any pressure from any quarter to improve the absorptiveness of solar panels or batteries or lubricating windmills? Is there any building pressure for that kind of investment to be happening?
Oh yeah, there absolutely is. The thing is, it's still more expensive. If you want cheap, everybody decries Walmart, okay? But everybody buys there because it's cheap. And it's the same thing with coal and oil and stuff. Well, oil is a special deal because oil is such a compact thing that's transportable. It's very hard to get rid of that. Batteries, yeah, well, sometime maybe. But it's all about cost for one thing. And these wind turbines, yeah, they're nice, but, people don't want them on their shoreline because it interferes with their view. People don't want to run the power lines across their thing because they look ugly. There's always both sides, and it's more expensive. I put solar on my house just a couple years ago because I'm getting subsidized 39 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, the program originally started at 62 cents a kilowatt hour, but it's because of the subsidy. In other words, you're not doing it because it's cost effective. You're doing it because you're getting contributions from people that say we really should get away from this carbon and go to photovoltaic. Yeah. I think that they're saying you can't even drill the hole. They're not saying what you can't put down the hole. They're saying you can't even drill a hole to frack. Now, the international trade thing says you can't tell people not to do that. So somebody from Canada could come in and say, I want to do it. So New York State would have to buy them off and say, look, instead of making your profit, here's $10 million, go away.
So they can still do it, but it has to be off the international.
Right. That's my understanding.
Duane, I was wondering if there's any talk in the sort of environmental community, just to use that as a term, as a way to counter this jobs argument. Is there anything that the environmentalists can say, hey, we can create jobs too? There are ways that, in terms of saving the environment, or as you were talking earlier about wind power and solar power, are there ways that they could counter the job argument with saying we can also create jobs, somewhat counterbalance all the talk on that side?
Well, perhaps. The thing is, there are so many sticky wickets associated with that. For instance, I think you can't, whenever Japan wants to buy just logs, they don't want to buy finished stuff. I'm not sure you could say you have to buy it finished because of these international trade agreements. It's the same thing with some of these other things where the international trade agreements won't let you put restrictions on certain things. One of the suggestions about shipping some of the things overseas was that, well, maybe what we should do is, instead of sending some of these oil chemicals and gas and so on, we should use those to make a secondary product that we then ship overseas to be used by the Japanese or the Russians or whoever. In other words, pre-process it and send a final product rather than just the raw materials. It's a tough thing, and I don't know the real answer to your question, but I think there are an awful lot. That's one of the reasons why they have some of these trade pacts. They don't want to have restrictions on any trade that would require something like that.
Right here.
I'd like to go back to the whole idea of mountaintop removal. I remember that at one point there was some state and federal legislation that was in the works to require that companies that involve themselves in mountaintop removal had a requirement to restore, which looks kind of odd when you look at the size of these mountaintop removal facilities. So I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit and see whatever happened.
Okay, I don't know a lot in detail. I know that whenever I grew up in Pennsylvania, they did surface mining there, and if they didn't restore it to the way that it was supposed to be returned back to grassland and so on, they had to pay $100 an acre. It wasn't worth it. They just walked away from it, paid their $100, okay? And I think it's perhaps a similar kind of thing here. Plus also, all the drainage that comes out of these things, I didn't show you some of the worst things, but there's no way you can recover that. Once you've destroyed all that stuff downstream and all the people in the local area, you can restore your heart out, and it still is not going to be going back and taking care of all of that stuff. And I'm not sure how much a lot of these things are enforced by the government. Money really talks. Why don't they stop these things? Why don't they shut these plants down if they don't pay their fines? Why don't they make this billionaire pay his couple of $1 million a fine instead of give $200 million to some charity? I mean, you know, we work in a very political environment, and people making the laws. I mean, when I hear what some of the people are talking about in Congress about what they want to do or don't do, everybody wants the stuff, but they don't want to pay taxes to pay for it. They want to privatize everything, and all bets are really off. Yeah.
Thinking about that transportation bill in the Oregon legislature, were you following what happened with that carbon business that was in that? I got mixed up with what.
No, I don't know what that is. The transportation bill.
There was a carbon emissions tax or something in there, and I never heard whether it passed or didn't pass.
I don't know what happened with that. Is that somebody else maybe?
It didn't.
It didn't pass. Okay, she said it didn't pass.
I was in Reykjavik in Iceland in May, and they get 95% of their energy from geothermal. Are we exploring any of that? I mean, we've got extinct volcanoes.
Yeah, we don't have as high intensity as they do. There is some work on that, but it turns out you have to have for one thing, you have to have it fairly close to where it is you're going to use it. There's some place in southern Oregon where they are close and they are using that. They use it to thaw some of their sidewalks. They've been doing this for years. And to heat, where is it? Klamath Falls, okay. And they use it to heat some of their buildings, but it's not high enough temperature accessible so that they can generate electricity with it, but they can use it to transfer heat and save in that way. But you have to be in the right place at the right thing in order to be able to benefit.
I just saw something last night. I don't know if you had time to read about this. That there's some kind of new study that said, 80 feet of sea level rising this century, which means a child born today could be in up to their head on this street right outside of this building today.
Yeah.
If this climate thing amounts to essentially a war on our cities, wouldn't people really get motivated to take stronger steps than just going out and having a happy time in a couple of kayaks?
Well, yeah, I hear you, but people don't really believe it. I mean, how many naysayers do you have? And I think the one you're talking, is it Jim Hansen, is it? Is he the guy? He's saying that, look, we don't know when it's going to happen, but once we get to a tripping point on one of these feedback loops that can be pretty serious, we're going to end up with exactly that. But we don't know when that tripping point is going to happen. And there are all kinds of neat videos that you can find, people talking, TED Talks, even on global warming, that tells how serious it really is. We're almost past the point, and once we get another degree centigrade higher, it's all over, folks. Not for us, but for a future generation or two. And so, yeah, it's really serious, but people can't get too involved unless it's happening. And a lot of people don't believe it. I find it hard not to tie into some of this stuff and understand it. But then again, I go to creationist meetings, and 6,000-year-old Earth, you got to be kidding. But if that's the mentality, and, you know... Oh, okay.
You didn't mention anything about coal dust. Some people say that an average coal car drops something like 550 pounds of coal dust in the course of his trip. Is that really a serious issue, or is it not?
You know, I've been kind of downplaying that an awful lot every time I hear it, Because I think, first of all, whenever they load up the coal things, a lot of the loose dust is going to be gone in the first 100 miles, I think. And coal dust is not that much of a problem, I don't think, compared to oil. I mean, you dump a whole carload of coal into the Columbia River, and it's not nice, but it's not like dumping the same amount of oil into the river. So I think the coal is, not good. Mostly it's a problem when you burn it. But oil is a problem handling it, spilling it, burning it, whatever. It's just a real major problem.
Yeah, I know that up in the Bay of Fundy, they're talking about using tidal currents to make power. Is that a viable option?
I'm sorry, what about the Bay of Fundy?
They're using tidal power?
Oh, using tidal power?
Yeah, is that any option?
Well,
is that a viable option?
Yeah, I don't know how much is really done. I mean, they're doing tidal studies down here off the coast of Oregon also. I think London with the Thames has done some things. There have been a few things done in France, but it's never really taken off. It's very investment heavy, and I'm not sure how much real heavy power you get out of it. It certainly is regular. I mean, the tides are going to be there, but I haven't seen it take off at all. But I've been aware of it several places.
It's me again. Every couple of years, I ask you about what's happening in the world of fusion.
Of what?
Fusion.
Fusion. Well, things are looking up, but not really. How does that answer your question? Everybody around the world has decided nobody really knows how to do it, so they've taken all the best ideas and they're putting together a $50 billion thing in Europe with a consortium very much like they did, to find the Higgs particle, okay, a huge big thing. Different style of equipment and stuff, okay. But it's a cooperation of several countries around the world. We're not as heavily involved as we should be. And the idea is that maybe in another 20, 30, 40 years, we might actually have some fusion power coming out of that. Now, one of the other things is that they managed to, there's another way you can get fusion power, not from electrical kinds of things in a magnetic bottle that squeezes things down to make hydrogen go into helium to get that extra energy out. There's another one where you take lasers and you blast them down and you put so much energy in there that it forces these atoms into each other. And they achieved that within the last year, 6 or 8 months ago. The trouble is you have to put a gazillion watts in to get 1,000 billionth of a watt out, okay? So it needs a little bit of improvement. But the thing is there's movement in that direction. Now, the bad news is also the real reason they built that thing, that big laser thing to push that stuff down, is not for creation of energy and exploring all that kind of stuff. It's because there's a ban on nuclear bomb testing. So this is to test new ideas that they have about how to build nuclear bombs, and that's what funded the whole thing. And oh yes, by the way, you scientists can come in and on the weekends we'll let you use it for this other purpose, kind of thing. Oh yeah.
Have they made any progress in ways to store the energy from the sun?
Well, not really, I don't think. The idea of using batteries has always been there, and it's always been very expensive. And you have a problem with recycling the batteries and all that kind of good stuff too. There's an awful lot of energy that goes into making a battery. And I guess the answer to your question is no. Some of the batteries that they have in these cars are pretty efficient, but on the other hand, they're extremely expensive, and they have a waste problem. And one thing that I hadn't had a chance to chase is they were saying that end-to-end, one of those batteries is not really very energy efficient because you have to spend so much energy making it and mining the materials that go into it, and then so much energy to dispose of it properly and make it so it's not going to be a contaminating problem, that overall you're not really, so I don't really know the answer to that. I think it's still up in the air about whether we're going to have good batteries or not. So, okay.